Welcome to another of Glasgow Wants to Know. Our subject tonight is something that affects our lives every day, and yet we don't realize what it is, and if we did, we wouldn't know why. That is, most of us. Tonight, to enlighten us, we have DJ Froedge, who is very knowledgeable on this and many other subjects, I know from personal experience. So he's going to enlighten us on the subject of physics and how it affects us. DJ, give them your background.
Thank you, Mr. Barrickman. My middle initial is T.
DT, and I have a habit of calling you DJ. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, I grew up here in Glasgow. Went to the places that most of the people here attended, Glasgow High. I had some wonderful teachers. Mrs. Smith comes to mind. When I finished here, I went to Western and enrolled in physics. I enjoyed it, and by the time I got through, I had enough courses for a double major in physics and a minor in math. And then I went to the UK for a while, which I wasn't very fond of in the physics department, and went on to University of Tennessee for a master's degree in electronics and physics. And then I went to Auburn University and finished the coursework for a PhD in physics. I never finished my dissertation, so I can't claim the title of doctor. But then I went off to work.
And give some of the work, give a history of some of the work you've done.
Most of the work that I've done is basically engineering. Physics is the underlying principles behind engineering, and so when a physicist wants to work for money, he has to sell his services, something he knows how to do. So he generally works on engineering. After Auburn, I went to work with General Dynamics on the F-111 as a senior aerosystems engineer. And then I went to work after that for the Madisonville Community College, and then I went to work for the state of Kentucky regulating explosives and blasting. And then I worked for a while with the Southern Explosives here and designing some new explosives, which you may be a little bit familiar with. Then I went to work with a consulting firm in vibration from blasting and things of that nature, and eventually ended up owning the company, and then we purchased another company in '95. So at this point I manage a couple of consulting firms that do vibration consulting and manufacturing of seismographs and things like that, and I operated basically from my home here in town with our wonderful internet communication services.
Now just explain what physics is and how it affects us.
Well, physics is the underlying attachment of mathematics to mass and matter. The underlying description of how things work with the use of mathematics. Very proper, accurate descriptions of how matter works, how radio waves work, how interaction of mass and matter, and how electrons flow and things of that nature. How rockets work, how combustion works, how things of that nature work. It basically applies the mathematics to that. It makes it a mathematical description so that an engineer can take that and design his rocket or design his transistor radio or things of that nature.
Now, what is chemistry?
Well,
how is it related?
Chemistry is related by the fact that the particles, the tiny particles of matter, the atoms and molecules and whatnot, all work under the laws of physics. They fly around in the submicroscopic world under the control of physics. They bind together because of the electric and the gravitational and the interaction of particles. And therefore, bonds that cause chemistry to work are described by physics. They are the basic underlying principles of all the sciences. It tells a chemist how to make a certain molecule bind together and how to structure it by understanding those mathematics.
Briefly, give us something about the origin of the subject.
Well, physics starts actually pre-Christ, back in the days of Ptolemy and Aristarchus and Archimedes and the earlier pre-Christ investigators that were actually very intelligent. They didn't have the apparatus and the things that we have today, but they were very inventive. Aristarchus actually decided that the sun was the center of the universe. Ptolemy didn't like that. Ptolemy said the earth is the center of the universe, and for 1,400 years Ptolemy's ideas were prevailed. And at about the time of Christ, from then up until the 1500s, science stopped. There was very little science at all during that period, and then in the 14 and 1500s, the scientists started picking up again, and you have people like Copernicus and Galileo and those people who started reinventing and rereading the old science and started moving science forward again, basically physics. And those people were really ostracized for doing that. Galileo was really ostracized for stating what he did. Copernicus and all the people who were working early were ostracized and were very hard pressed to move the science forward, but they did. And then came along probably the greatest physicist of all time, and that would have been Sir Isaac Newton, who changed physics from tinker toys to the rocket age. And with what he did and his mathematics and the application of that math to gravitation and mechanics and all that, it moved from where we were 2,000 years ago to where we are now. And virtually all of mechanical engineering and all of the things that build our buildings and things like that are the results of what Newton did. They're extensions of that. So he built the underlying mathematics that the engineers are still reveling in.
Now, of those you mentioned in the 14th century and in that area, what was their each one's contribution?
Well, you take someone like Galileo. Galileo invented the telescope. He realized that with focusing light, you could create a vision of an image at a great distance, and was able to actually make telescopes and sell telescopes and do things like that. Newton, the contributions to Newton, I think the acclaim that you can give to Newton just can't be understated. Can't be overstated. He's essentially created it. The earlier, from about that time, from the time of Galileo and Leonardo da Vinci and those people, we moved via Newton into a new age of mathematics and real powerful stuff that allowed us to develop. And it allowed basically civilization to move in the last 400 years as a result of being able to use the mathematics that they developed, and we've moved on.
And where and when was basic mathematics developed?
Well, it had been developing a long time. little things like the zero and obviously the ancient Egyptians knew a lot about geometry and whatnot. They actually knew a lot back then. Like Ptolemy, for example, knew the Earth was round. He knew how big it was. He was able to estimate it by knowing that on a certain day of the year, in a certain location, the sun went vertically down a shaft, a well. And he knew what it did at another place when it was vertical. And he knew the angle at this other location. And then he was able to, by virtue of the marching steps of soldiers, which is how they measured distance in those days, determine the diameter of the Earth within 7%. And knew that it was round and it revolved in space, that the sun went round. But the general population didn't know that, of course, until, they were still believing the world was flat when Christopher Columbus was around and was thinking he was going to fall off. And a lot of what we knew at that time sort of went into the Dark Ages and was lost. And only into the 14 and 15 did you start seeing it reemerge and people learning about the sciences. And with the application, the ability of the physicists. Now that's the physics part, is that F equals ma, the actual precise mathematics. Then you can start doing the engineering and develop and make your sciences come on. But until that, you can't go. And if it hadn't been for Sir Isaac Newton, we'd still be somewhere back 400 or 500 years. It's hard to believe that you can't move without the mathematics, but you can't. You can't develop, you can't go on. And if it hadn't been done, we still wouldn't be there. Progress, 400 years ago was not something that there was a real concept of progress or the future. This generation was like this generation was like this generation. The plow was the same, it didn't change. It's only in the last few hundred years have we seen actual change in technology and what we call progress, which is the utilization of this technology. And it's because of the mathematics that underlies it that allows our engineers to build it.
Somehow or other, some basic mathematics had to be retained by somebody in the period from the Egyptians until the time that it was Newton and others used
started picking it up. Well, there was geometry, and geometry, they used primarily geometry in those days, in the earlier times. The Pythagorean theorem and things like that. Those are really ancient concepts. But the actual algebra and the actual mathematics and the calculus and the description of matter by mathematics, which is different than just the mathematics. 1 plus 2 plus 3 in this block, and you add it up and you get a bunch of blocks, or the displacement, a few things like that. But when you're able to actually calculate the trajectory of something, or the strength of something, or how much pressure something will take, or when you put the pressure on something here, how much you can move here. When you can actually put the mathematics to that, then you can do something and your engineers can build it. Without that, you can't do anything. Without all of the stuff, for example, Edison, when he was building the light bulb, without all the stuff that somebody else had already done, he couldn't have built a light bulb. Unless they had the electricity and they had all of the stuff, he wouldn't have been able to do that. And so everything just sort of builds on it. But it is this application, the ability to calculate what matter is going to do, that allows us to build. Without it, you can't build a building because you don't know what the strengths are. You don't know how much strength you've got to have in a block in order to support a skyscraper that's 1,000 feet high. You can't do that without the math. The sum of the forces have to be equal to 0. That's one of the concepts that Newton did, and he was able to mathematically describe that in a way that allows you to calculate out how to build things.
What about the Egyptians?
Well, the Egyptians had rudimentary mathematics, but it was mostly geometry, and they had systems of keeping up with numbers and calculating things. but it was very simplistic and mostly geometry. They drew things out and made them proportional. And they knew what right triangles were and squares were and things of that nature, but they really didn't have the decimal systems, and they didn't have the algebras that we currently have. They didn't have equations.
How did they build the pyramids?
A lot of sweat. But they were terrific engineers in the sense that they could lay things flat and lay things in line and get them cut perfectly and lined up and moved. I think the greater magic is in how much mass they actually moved to build those. To get things cut square and get them cut accurately, I mean, it's just a matter of hammering and hammering and hammering and lining strings up and pulling them. If you want levelness, you put water in something and you float it, and you get 2 points that are equally level. They're very crafty, but you could do all that. Obviously, they did.
They had to have some engineering or something in order to build those pyramids.
They were what you would call engineers, but they didn't have the tools that we have now.
Now, how did these tools develop from one period to the next? For instance, Newton had certain ideas, and then you had other scientists that improved on them, and I don't know now, but I don't suppose Newton knew about electronics.
Newton,
somebody had to develop many physical aspects after that.
well, yes, I mean, after that, I mean, there's still a lot of science that is developed. What Newton did, I mean, it's just like turning on a switch. If you look at a point in history where things converged, it's right there. For example, the mathematics that he developed is used for electronics. I mean, you can't calculate out an electronic circuit without the math that Sir Isaac developed. The simplest circuit that you ever looked at can't be described without integral calculus. It's just amazing if you look at what was turned on when he did that. The electronic circuitry are all described in terms of differential and integral calculus.
But that was developed after him.
He did it.
Oh, he did it.
He did the electronics.
He did
the calculus that allowed the description of electronic circuitry. The biography named him as the second most influential individual in the millennium, and the only one was before him was Gutenberg. Gutenberg invented the press. He really didn't invent a whole lot, but he did make a press, which that was symbolic of the press. But in reality, Sir Isaac Newton started this whole ball, and anybody who has a good perspective on it can realize it. It's just like the spark hit the ignition. It's amazing. There have been lots of scientists since Sir Isaac, and the things that have been done are spectacular. He just happens to be probably the first and probably the greatest. You move on up into the late 18th century and the 19th century, you find some really good stuff. You find the Einsteins, the Dirac, Riemann, Heisenberg, that have really advanced science and in the development of the more advanced sciences. This came in the 20th century, but the start of it was in the 1700s.
If I understand you, in essence, these later scientists merely amplified what Newton started.
Well, they needed what Newton started in order to get where they are. I mean, they couldn't go from there. But once you've moved on up, I mean, the mathematics developed, and there are some very powerful mathematics that aren't really, wasn't even thought about by Newton. For example, Riemannian geometry, which was the basis for general relativity, gravitation theories. The differential equations, which, although developed by Newton, progressed into quantum mechanics and some rather interesting science.
Just what do you mean by quantum mechanics?
Quantum mechanics is a branch of physics that was discovered starting in the early 20s and is still going on, that that described matter in terms of very microscopic particles and of wave theory. That is, instead of describing a particle as a little body that has a trajectory, these calculations are based on probability densities. And it turns out that the world in very small parts works this way. And this mathematics and this science is basically what is necessary for your transistors and for your computers and for all the things that went on from there. You couldn't have the nice TVs and the transistor radios and all the things that we have today without what's known as quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the mechanism that allows the description of matter so you can have transistors and photodiodes and all the things that you need for today's electronics.
Now, how did the math apply to the atom and its discovery, so to speak?
Well, the atom was originally described by a fellow named Niels Bohr. And he decided that the atom was a little bitty particle in the center of the nucleus with an electron orbiting it. And it's described as the Bohr atom, or the Bohr hydrogen atom. And it predicted some really interesting stuff. All this spectra that you get when you excite it were describable in this. But it couldn't be taken on. It wasn't accurate enough. And that's when a fellow named Schrodinger came up with an equation, which, speaking of pulling things out of the air, he said, here it is. And it described the hydrogen atom so perfectly and so beautifully that even though we don't know where it comes from, we know it works, and it is super accurate. And, and like a lot of quantum mechanics, when we moved on into quantum electrodynamics, the accuracy of these equations that describe this are so superbly accurate, you can't deny they're right. It's just they give really weird concepts. They're hard to conceive exactly how they work, but they describe things well. The accuracy, for example, of the calculation of the gyromagnetic ratio, which is a real constant in physics, they're able to calculate that to an accuracy of, say, from San Francisco to New York within the width of a human hair. It's just super precise calculations, one part in billions. Billions and billions, as they say. So we know these numbers and these formulas work, but a lot of times we don't have a good understanding of what they actually, where they come from. We use them and we know they work, but we don't know exactly where they came from. Sort of weird.
So you really don't know why, you just know they work.
That's exactly right. In Newton, we know F equals ma, and we know this is nice and solid. But when the equations get to be pulled out of the air, and they are, I mean, you can't, you can sort of massage some other equations that we know about to get them, but in reality, they don't know where they come from. But they accurately describe matter, and that's what physics is about, accurately describing matter.
And you've got to accurately describe it to get all the things that we've got today.
That's exactly right. If you want what we have today, you have to accurately describe matter mathematically, or you can't do it. You have to be able to precisely calculate exactly what's going to happen when you lay down deposit on a substrate and you expect it to operate like a transistor, you got to know what you're putting down, and it's got to be calculable very accurately, or you could just be making up a little pile of garbage that won't do anything.
Now, how's all of this included in mass production?
Well, they do. In reality, transistors are mass produced.
Yeah, I know.
But the development of those, when Shockley developed the transistor, I mean, he was, you know, back there calculating and trying to figure for years and years exactly how you mix the proper quantity and lay them in proper contact to get them to do what you want to do, to switch that electron flow. And that's what they do, is switch an electron flow with the mathematics of quantum mechanics.
But how do you know that a separate one is just right if they're mass produced?
Well, the way they mass produce them, they essentially do it the way you do a photographic process. You lay a substrate down, and then you overlay it with something that masks it, or like a photographic image, and then you lay another layer on top of that has the right proximity to mass, so that when you energize one part, it stops the electron flow in another part. When you put voltage on one part, the electrons can't flow anymore, so it shuts them off. It acts like a switch. And that's what essentially electronics, I mean, as you know it, the transistor, and that's all it really is. It's a way of controlling electron flow.
It's a switch.
Switching on and off. Little switches that you can build 1 million, 10 million of, on the size something of the order of a square centimeter. There's millions in that little place there. Your computers, for example, they're essentially billions of switches that are all compacted onto little bitty chips.
Now, what about the transmission of sight, in particular, without wires that you're doing these days?
The radio transmission? Or the
No,
TV
I'm talking about
transmission?
pictures.
Transmission of pictures like this.
Yes.
Well, essentially, that's the underlying of all of that is basically physics, but the engineers have applied it. For example, you take a camera, it focuses light. Let me sketch it. What can I do? Can I do that? Okay. This may or may not work. But let's say you have an image out here. Not much of a smiley face. And you have a lens, a detector, and then you have a electronic device. This could be a storage device or a transmission device. Transmits it over to your house. Comes in on your antenna, comes out your TV, and you have your smiley face. The physics of this is the focusing of the image onto the substrate. This is something that Galileo invented and was amplified by a lot of people. This is the focusing. This is the development of the lens and whatnot that focuses on a substrate. The substrate is a device for detecting this image, and the way this detects this image is that there are electrons knocked off. When these light particles hit this, they knock electrons off of little spots. This is called an array. And it's just thousands and thousands and thousands of little bitty transistors. And when a light ray hits that, it knocks off some electrons. And then the circuitry can tell how many electrons are knocked off. Now, the knocking off of those electrons was something that Einstein developed. It's called the photoelectric effect. And it removes, when the light hits that, the electrons are knocked off. The electrons are knocked off. The more they're knocked off, the higher the number is of this pixel. So this pixel goes from black at 0 to white at 256. So then these numbers are all transmitted in an array, or in order, bing, 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 into the memory device, into what would be a file. It would be just rows and rows of numbers. Then those numbers are then converted into radio waves, transmitted out across. Now this process here, if you want to say this was more the Dirac quantum mechanics and Schrodinger. This particular transmission across the airwaves was all done by a fellow named Maxwell back in the 1800s, the late 1800s. Maxwell's equations described this just as perfect as can be. The radio reception, these were done, the engineering part was done by Marconi and others. Faraday and some of the earlier people worked out the mathematics of this. And then it comes out your TV. You have a electron beam that shoots out and hits your target screen. The control of this electron beam was done by Faraday and Ampere, that learned how to control the beam, and the trajectory was controlled by mathematics of Newton. So
essentially, you're transmitting images.
You're transmitting the image. This array, this picture is put onto this array in numbers, just one number after another. In other words, if it's real bright at this point right here, this gets a 256. If it's dark, it gets a 0. And these sets of numbers, this thing just scans it like this. This row of numbers goes flying into this storage device, or from there into the radio wave that's transmitted to your TV. The distinction here is between the engineering, which is the actual building of this, and the mathematics and the development of how it works.
You see oftentimes the subject of special relativity. What's that?
Well, special relativity is the first theory of Newton. Of Einstein. Einstein discovered the relationship between matter and velocity. And he did it based on some experiments, his thought experiments based on the Michelson-Morley experiment and some others. It turns out that it could have been written down by some other people. Lorentz, for example, the Lorentz transforms were already in existence. If one had just recognized what they were looking at, they could have written down the special theory of relativity. Einstein actually looked at it and said, basically E equals mc squared is what you get. But there's a little more to it than that. But that's the special theory, and it has to do with the relationship between energy and velocity and energy and matter.
Now, what about general relativity?
General relativity is a lot different. It is a different, although they're intermeshed. The general theory of relativity is a theory of gravitation that is based on a warped or distorted geometry. And this is an extremely difficult area of mathematics. Tensor analysis, I don't say it's extreme, it's difficult for people to understand. It described accurately the gravitational laws to a very, very precise accuracy and was able to predict a lot of things that people didn't understand for a long time. It actually, when Einstein was developing it, he was trying to develop a theory based on principles of a fellow named Ernest Mach, who laid down some ground rules for what gravitation should be. And Einstein thought, when he had it developed, that it was. But it turns out it wasn't. It still is not a Machian theory, as you would say. And even though Einstein agreed, and everybody agrees, that the Machian ideas are correct, the general relativity is probably an approximation. It's not, we know it's not accurate in a lot of areas. We know that it doesn't describe very well when you get to the microscopic level. And it doesn't describe space in terms of what I think, and I think Einstein agreed, that the Mach theory or the Mach philosophy would have it. So it is a known target. There is going to be a revision of general relativity one of these days. At this point, I don't think the physics community would have it, though. This is very political. And
why is that?
Well, things have to fit. And this is true of the physics community as well. It's not only just, political community. It's more political than anything else. Anything that really would challenge the general theory of relativity is generally relegated to the back pages of somebody's website, and they're not really published in the mainstream. It's going to have to be, whatever replaces, it's going to have to be good and accurate and provable, and everybody's going to have to say, just stand up and salute before it's going to be even considered as a challenge.
Now, just what is it that we have that uses general relativity?
Actually, nothing. There's probably not an engineering device in the world that needs the predictions or the calculations based on general relativity. General relativity accurately predicts the advance in the perihelion of Mercury and some others, which means it's a very esoteric. I mean, just the concept of what that means is pretty esoteric in itself. It does cause light to bend when it moves near a heavy object such as the sun. When a star light passes the sun, it's bent. General relativity properly predicts that. In cosmology and whatnot, the theory of relativity is used to predict a lot of stuff. But down to base use, it's not much. Now, special theory is used a lot. Special theory, I mean, everything based on atomic energy is special theory of relativity. Everything that all your weaponry, all of the special theory is a super precise, unchallengeable set of consistent theories. The general theory has got some problems, and it's sort of on the esoteric side. But it was said, to be Einstein's crowning achievement, although he didn't win a Nobel Prize for it.
You mentioned atomic energy. Why did it take, in your opinion, why did it take so long to develop the atomic bomb?
Well, actually, it didn't take very long.
Well, it was centuries passed and nobody thought of it, and yet as far as other fundamentals, they knew about it.
But remember, Einstein did the special theory in 1905, and no one really recognized that there was a difference in the amount of energy in atoms when they were in, say, hydrogen or iron. But when they counted it all up and weighed it out, they discovered there's a lot of difference in the mass. So where's the mass going? When they took the mass of uranium, and it has a certain number of protons and electrons, and you take them apart, and you take iron, for example, and you take the exact same number of iron protons and electrons, there's some mass missing. And someone scratched their head and said, hey, this thing is going to let this go if you do it right. And but they really didn't start this. This was the war years. This probably didn't get started until in the 30s. I think Einstein wrote the letter to Roosevelt sometime in the 1930s that said this could be done. But I mean, this was a short time fuse when they said, from Fermi and some of the boys that were working on this, in reality, within a very few years, made a huge bomb and essentially developed the whole theory of nuclear energy. From the 1930s to the 1950s, they had, already started producing electricity with atomic energy. So I don't know that it's a real short time.
Now, I have wondered about this myself, so I imagine some other people have. You can use nuclear energy to cause these mass explosions, but by the same token, you can use nuclear energy to fuel power plants and submarines and so forth and so on. What's the difference?
Well, in the source of the energy, or the fact you can produce energy, there's not a lot of difference. In the case of the atomic bomb, there is a mechanism that can allow you to release it very quickly by creating a chain reaction that is just, it can be done and produced so quickly that it just explodes. On the other hand, you can control how much release of this is by the use of moderators and by making products that are not so pure that you can control how much is released. And so essentially a nuclear reactor is just a heat-producing device. A bomb is just a heat-producing device too, but it produces it so fast and so much that it can't be contained.
So the difference is actually in the release of the nuclear energy.
Right. Both of them are the release of nuclear energy. One is just very quick, and one is controlled release, smaller control. But for example, these things can get away from you. They have. Like Chernobyl thing got away. Essentially, if you don't moderate it properly and control it properly, it can get away from you and detonate. And that's an engineering problem.
What's this? I realize it's an engineering problem, but what is it that goes wrong when they don't control it?
Well, in the nuclear core, there you cause this to react by pulling control rods out, and that makes the mass exposed to each other. This operates on a thing called critical mass, and the more you have more densely, the more energy you get out, because it produces neutrons that set off other atoms to burst, and they just get away. You moderate it by putting control rods in, mostly graphite or something of that nature, that causes and slows the reaction down. If you pull those out too far, the more you pull them out, the more energy you get out. And you are also, at the same time, you're running a coolant. Mostly, most of them are water core, or some of the newer ones are not. But they have water running through that cools it down, and you convert that to steam that you use to drive your turbines. If you don't put enough water in it to keep it cool, it's going to go. It can get away from you. If you pull the rods out and you don't get any water, your water dies, for example. And that's just what happened in Chernobyl. They didn't have any water in it. The water pumps failed, and the thing detonated.
Now, that's the first time I'd heard that the water pumps failed, and that's what caused it.
That was essentially, you got to keep water flowing through that thing and steam coming out while you've got it on.
Well, I had understood that, but I didn't know that the pumps failed over there is what caused it.
I think that's essentially the major problem that caused the detonation.
There's an article in Courier this morning about black holes. Talk about those that for a while.
Well, I'm not a real fan of black holes. Black holes are one of the predictions of general relativity. And in the last 10 years, everybody's been seeing black holes every time they look through a telescope. It seems to be the object du jour. It's an artifact of the general theory of relativity, and it essentially is a singularity. And Einstein said that it was a mathematical artifact and had no significance. And that's the way he treated it all his life. And I think that's the good way to do it. It has some real thorny issues associated with the mathematics of it, but everyone's seeing black holes everywhere. And the theory is, and the math is there, that if a light beam goes in, it can't come out. It's stuck. Nothing can come out. Essentially, matter keeps falling in and disappearing in a black hole.
Well, what if I think I've read maybe in one of those articles this morning that I think this article just stated that the black holes were caused by exploding stars.
Well, that's an idea that somebody has conjured up. The problem with a black hole is, in the universe, it takes an infinite amount of time to create one. And you can't create one in the universe today. I mean, one can't form because it takes an infinite amount of time for it to happen. And that's one of the problems with it, and that's one of the problems that Einstein, it can't form. After the universe is formed, either all of them are black holes, all your black holes are there, or there ain't going to be any more. My personal view is that anything can't be explained in the current cosmology. They ascribe the term black hole to it. It doesn't make sense to me that a light beam can go in and it can't get out. Just from a basic aesthetics, where's all the mass in the universe is going to go down this black hole, and we're all in a black hole? Why hadn't it happened already? We're still here. I just I really don't think that it's there. I think eventually people will come to the realization that it's just a mathematical artifact, and it's just another problem with general relativity, and it's not anything of significance.
Actually, what causes the means of producing electricity?
What causes the means for
producing electricity?
AC electricity?
Yeah.
Well,
And the difference between AC and DC?
Well, a fellow named Faraday, back in the 1800s, I believe Faraday did, playing around with wires and magnets, discovered that when a wire is passed over a magnet, it generates an electric current. You take a magnet and you take a wire and you pull it across it and you measure out here the ends of it. Electricity is induced in it. You get a voltage out there. And he was able to accurately figure out the relationship between the magnet and the current. And some really brilliant people with what's now General Electric, I think a fellow named Steinmetz, who was the real wizard behind AC electricity and the induction and the mathematics of it, were able to figure out how to do it. And essentially you take what's known as a dynamo, and if you crank it hard enough in a magnetic field, it produces a voltage. If you allow the current to go one way at one time, and then when it comes on around, it turns and goes the other way. So the electricity is going back and forth, back and forth. Okay, if it's going one way, that's called DC. That's your DC current. A battery produces DC current, only one direction. A generator produces current that goes back and forth called AC. So it'll go one way for a 60th of a second, and then another 60th of a second is going the other way. So you have an AC circuit, which is alternating current, and a DC, which is direct current. The magnets are the magnetic and the induction allows us to transmit energy from the dynamo or the nuclear power plant or the steam generator or whatever. That dynamo's turning. They have essentially dynamos now it's bigger than this room that generate a alternating 60 cycle per second current that gets transmitted all around the country through these wires and comes right into your house.
Now, what produces static electricity? You don't have magnets.
Now, static electricity is a flow of electricity, just like the one going through the wires, except that it is essentially free electrons. It is the current in the wire is bound. They're going back and forth. They're bound in there. The static electricity, like lightning and rubbing yourself and getting shocked, are free electrons that are on the surface of things, and they can be wiped off and collected. If you take a balloon and a piece of fur and you rub it across the top, it collects those electrons. And you hold it over here and pow, you can get a jump between the two. So the difference is basically a current that goes in the wires and carried inside versus a surface charge, which is generally static electricity.
Rocket science.
Rocketry. Well, the rockets, they started out in the 30s with people who were hardly more than toys, and stayed that way up until World War II, when the Germans decided that you could make a device that would lift a lot of stuff and deliver it a long distance away. Basically, this is one of the areas in which Newton's principles and Newton's calculations are the holy grail, and the calculation of orbits and things of that nature that are used to predict and control and direct the rocketry. Basically, it is action equals reaction. You have a fluid, and you put it into a chamber and you set it afire, and when it explodes, it jets out one, and the other pushes your rocket. And it's a very, very simple condition of F equals ma, the basic first principle of Newton. More sophisticated as time goes on.
Why the difference in sounds? Some loud and some soft.
Well, sound is an oscillation of air, or anything actually. Primarily for humans, it's air. It is, in essence, the movement of sound, very, very small distances, a few thousandths of an inch. It moves back and forth. It creates a pressure wave. When you speak, and if your voice is, say, generates a signal at, say, 500 hertz, there's a wave, pressure wave, that transmits out and goes back and forth like that. And the harder it pushes, the louder you get. So when you say something loud, that release of the vibrations in your vocal cords produce a vibration in the air that's essentially a back and forth pressure wave that transmits to your eardrum and presses on it 1,000 or 500 times a second, and you can hear the sound. Higher the pressures, the higher the volume, the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. Relatively mathematically can be very complicated, but pretty well worked out science.
Yes, I can understand that. I knew that before we started, but you have certainly amplified it. It's been a long time since I studied physics, so
I understand.
Yeah.
The one thing about physics that I think, from the time that I was a kid to now, has changed, and it's subtle, but most people, is that we had this impression that if you knew the initial condition of everything, then you could know how it goes throughout the future. That is, if you knew the initial conditions, you could predict the future. If you knew that, if you had a computer that could know accurately the position of every molecule in the world, you could know the future. So, therefore, even though you don't know it, the future is predicted. But over the last 25 or 30 years, the concept of chaos has arrived, which is it's not something that has swept physics or anything, but it really changes your philosophy of what life is and what's free will. And you discover that you do have free will, and there's nothing that can stop it. There's no way of predicting the future. You can't separate.
We're about out of time. What about digital cameras and everything we're hearing today about digital?
Well, digital is as we went over here, it's a mathematical way of doing things. That's another thing that's changed from when I was young. Everything was analog. All the radios were analog, the TVs were analog. The concept of digital TV was non-existent. It turns out with the transistor and with high-speed systems, digital works a lot more efficiently. You can store stuff, you can move stuff better and cheaper and quicker, and just about the entire electronic industry now works off of digital systems.
We're out of time. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it, and
enjoyed talking.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.